Hola amigos, ¿qué tal? Stuart here from Spain Speaks with an update on the current situation here in Spain, day 337 of the current situation. And it's election day today in Catalonia with the former health minister, Mr. Illa, running for office in that part of the world, but more about that in just a moment. Firstly, a big thanks to all of the people that left comments on the last video. Lots of comments and debate happening there as usual. Thanks to people that supported the channel through a donation. You can see your names here. Thanks to people that bought merchandise, and a big thanks to my patrons on Patreon for your support. Now, let's get into the news. And as I said, elections being held today in Catalonia. It's election day today in Catalonia. The centralist parties here in Spain, desperate to break the power that the separatists have in that part of the world. Hence, Mr. Illa running for office. As we can see here, Spain's Catalonia holds regional election, testing separatists' strength. Catalonia goes to the polls this Sunday for an election Madrid hopes will unseat the region's ruling separatists more than 3 years after a failed bid to break away from Spain. But the vote could see a high level of abstentions as Spain battles a third wave of the pandemic. Regional authorities ramped up restrictions to slow soaring case numbers after the Christmas holidays, and while the situation has slightly improved, the figures are still high. So Madrid, desperate to unseat those pesky separatists, hence Mr. Illa's move from national politics to regional politics in the last month or so. However, it might not be easy for Mr. Illa to win in Catalonia. As we can see here, the government fears that a high abstention today will prevent Mr. Illa's victory. Separatism is conspired to avoid Illa's investiture if he is victorious. The eruption of Vox puts Casado's leadership and the survival of Ciudadanos to the test. So due to the health situation in Catalonia, there's a high risk that a lot of people won't turn out to vote, so definitely no shoo-in for Mr. Illa. Now, with the health crisis here in Spain improving slightly in recent times, various autonomous communities have decided to ease restrictions. We can see here that some autonomous communities have made measures more flexible given the decline in the contagion curve. Some communities have timidly begun to relax with the improvement of the data, which is still bad. Castilla y León has lifted the extremely exceptional measures in 25 municipalities that maintained a high incidence rate. So some measures being relaxed around the country, and it's probably no coincidence that it coincides with this weekend's carnival celebrations. The majority of measures that are being relaxed are related to the opening times of bars and restaurants. For example, in places like Castilla-La Mancha, bars are now allowed to open again, but mobility restrictions are still in place. As we can see here from this map, the majority of autonomous communities around Spain remain closed, and 5 autonomous communities, 3 on mainland Spain and the 2 sets of Ireland, have partial closures. So still virtually impossible to travel around the country at the moment. Now let's have a look at some of the health data. We'll start off by looking at the vaccination plan and see if there has been any progress made regarding vaccinations, and then we'll take a look at a map of Spain and various autonomous communities looking at the health data. Starting with the vaccination plan, we can see that only 2.11% of the population, or just over 1 million people, have completed their vaccinations, and 3% of the population, or 1.4 million people, have received at least one of the 2 doses. The health data now, we can see that the risk level around the country is still extreme. The total amount of cases, the accumulated incidence rate for the last 14 days now down to 496. There have been 1,679 COVID-related deaths in the last 7 days. There are currently 22,311 people hospitalised around Spain with COVID, and there are 4,350 people in ICUs around the country, which is just under 40% of all ICUs. The Valencian community now, the risk level there is still extreme. The total amount of cases, the AI rate for the last 14 days now sitting at 690. There have been 312 COVID-related deaths in the last 7 days. There are currently 2,785 people hospitalised in the Valencian community with COVID, and there are 619 people in ICUs, which is just under 50% of all ICUs in that autonomous community. Andalusia now, risk level is also extreme. The accumulated incidence rate now down to 587. There have been 308 COVID-related deaths in the last 7 days, 3,725 people currently hospitalised in Andalusia with COVID, and there are 698 people in ICUs, which is 36% of all ICUs in Andalusia. Now, there's been a fair bit of talk about the pension system here in Spain, whether it is sustainable long term. Some people think that it is, some people think that it isn't. Well, the pensioners here in Spain are having none of that nonsense about it not being sustainable, and as we can see here, they are protesting against against the use of the pandemic as an excuse for not guaranteeing decent pensions. Thousands of pensioners have mobilised in the three Basque capitals, as well as in some 30 municipalities in the community, as well as in the Navarran city of Pamplona, to demand that decent, fair and sufficient public pensions be guaranteed. They warn that the problem not only affects pensioners but the next generations, and denounces that no measures are taken for the excuse of the pandemic. The protesters argue that thanks to the struggle, pensioners have exposed the big lies that the public pension system is unsustainable. They claim a minimum pension of €1,080, automatic revaluation of pensions according to the cost of living, a minimum wage of €1,200, and the end of tax deductions for private pension plans and funds. So pensioners in the north of the country not lying down, protesting and refuting claims that the system is unsustainable. Now, there's also been a fair bit of talk about the economy here in Spain for 2021. Brussels came out the other day and said that they expect the economy here to grow by 5.6% in 2021. But of course, that growth rate will depend on various circumstances, especially when it comes to some of the big engines of the Spanish economy performing this year. Tourism, as we know, is one of those engines, and as we can see here, another year without tourism, the great threat to the Spanish economy. Skyrocketing unemployment and debt, risks of a new wasteful season. The growth of the Spanish economy forecast for this year is largely subject to the recovery of a tourist activity plagued with uncertainties. This was stated this week by the European Commissioner for the Economy, Paolo Gentiloni. Businessmen and analysts warn about it, and there is acknowledgement from the government, although they do not make it explicit. Another disastrous summer season like the last one would have a highly destructive effect in structural terms, says Maria Jesus Fernandez, a senior economist at Funcas. Beyond the evolution of GDP, a new slow-paced summer will deepen the loss of productive fabric, greatly increase unemployment levels, and further skyrocket the debt of public administrations, which already amounts to €1.31 trillion, summarises Fernandez. What happens this year with tourism is going to be decisive in economic terms, agrees Andreu Garcia Vaquero, consultant in Alfi's analysis and markets area. And it must be taken into account, he continues, that the recovery of this sector will be slower because it is the most dependent on the health situation and mobility. So let's hope we can get the health situation under control and avoid another disastrous tourist season here in Spain. Now let's have a look at some of the comments from previous videos. One here from Margaret: we're definitely going to have a fourth wave after Easter, just as we've had spikes after summer vacations and Christmas. There seems to be no memory or understanding on the part of politicians, hospitality industry folks, the occasional meddling judge, or people who are desperate to socialise and visit their families, no matter how deadly that may be. Every time the numbers get a little bit better, everyone agitates to lift restrictions and the numbers spike again. Lather, rinse, repeat until vaccinations finally catch up. Yeah, Margaret, thanks for the comment. The fourth wave has been spoken about. We're just getting over the third wave, but there's already talk about a fourth wave. We saw Fernando Simon, Spain's health expert, last week come out and said that he expects a fourth wave, although I think he said that it's going to be milder and slower than the third one. And you're right, the trend has been up until now to enforce restrictions when the health situation gets bad, and then ease restrictions when things get better, and then put those restrictions back when the health situation gets out of control again. That's been the trend. We've gone up, we've gone down. I've said that on numerous occasions over the last few weeks, and this unfortunately seems that it's going to be the case until, as you say, vaccinations catch up. But as we just saw, only 2% of the population has had both doses of the vaccine, so it's going to be a long time until we catch up, unfortunately. One here from Tony: hi Stuart, don't think you mentioned Valencia bars and restaurant closures extended to March the 1st at earliest. Puig concentrated on vaccinations, this might not have been necessary. With 100 million vaccine doses coming in the next few months, will the health service speed up the vaccinating? What chance of a return to normal if they are not able to increase the speed? The UK is aiming for 15 million this weekend. Unless Spain catches up pretty quickly, they can forget a holiday season. Yeah, Tony, thanks for the comment. I'm not sure if I did or didn't mention that extension to restrictions in the Valencian community. I think I mentioned it briefly, but to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. I think some of the reasons for the slow pace of the vaccination plan here in Spain are related to supply and logistics. I don't think it's local politicians' fault. I think Mr. Puig is probably doing all that he can to get people vaccinated, but the vaccines are just not arriving. We know that in Madrid, for example, they had to suspend the vaccination plan because they didn't have enough vaccines, and I think that was common in other parts of the country as well, most likely Valencia. But we're 2 months into the vaccination plan here in Spain, and we are well behind other countries around the world, especially the UK, as you mentioned there, 15 million aimed for this weekend. Countries like Israel as well. I think the United States has been fairly active with their plan, but as I said, things moving very, very slowly here. And as we just saw, the tourist season for 2021 is at risk. One here from Anne. Hi Stuart, good to keep up. Thank you. Have you seen any news regarding vax for over 65s? Nobody seems to be taking notice of our age group. Keep up the very good videos, Anne and Paul. Benissa. Yeah, Anne and Paul, thanks for the comment. Not really sure what's happening with vaccines for the over 65s. I've had a few other comments from people asking similar questions, but I don't know exactly what the situation is. I read somewhere that the government has changed the vaccination strategy because there's new vaccines coming into the equation, for example, the AstraZeneca vaccine from the UK, but as we know, that is only available for people between the ages of 18 and 55. But the good news is that that takes the stress off the other vaccines, meaning that people like yourselves in the age bracket that you mentioned will have access to the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines because those are the ones that are being designated to people in those age brackets, and the other vaccine being administered to essential workers in the army, teachers, etc. between the ages of 18 and 55. So I can't give you an exact time frame on when you're going to be vaccinated, but my girlfriend's parents are in their 70s, so as soon as I hear about them being vaccinated, I'll let you guys know. One here from Thomas. Nice format for a change. I would be interested in hearing about what one might expect in the next year or so regarding rents and housing prices, not just in Madrid but other parts of Spain, especially in the north. I usually look at the Idealista website for Asturias and Galicia, but do not see much change so far. Thanks. Yeah, Thomas, thanks for the comment and thanks for the suggestion. We will be keeping an eye on property prices around the country. A lot of people expecting them to come down, but as you said, you haven't really noticed much of a change in Galicia and Asturias. Rental prices, as we mentioned the other day, are on their way down, especially in some of the big cities here in Spain, Madrid, Valencia, Barcelona, for example, but I'm not really sure what's happening in some other parts of the country, especially smaller cities in the places that you mentioned there in the north of the country. But we'll keep an eye out and see if there is a downward trend when it comes to rental prices and property prices around the country in coming months and years. So stay tuned. Finally, one here from Ken. I did read an article today on Google, don't remember the news source, but Spain will soon have a lot of vaccines available. In fact, Spain has a pharmaceutical company that's making vaccines shortly and should be producing so much it will be exported. Yeah, Ken, thanks for the comment. I think I did mention the other day that Spain is going to have access to something like 100 million more doses of the vaccines, ones that are going to be produced here in Spain, and then as you mentioned, they're going to be exported to other European countries. I can't remember the exact dates they mentioned for these 100 million doses of the vaccines, but I think they said in 2 or 3 months' time. So if that is the case, Spain should no longer have a problem with vaccine supply. On that note, I'll start to wrap the video up. Questions and comments, please leave them in the section below. Debate the situation out. Give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. I'll see you in tomorrow's video. Hasta mañana.